Professor Dan McCarthy. He's an assistant professor of marketing from Emory University, Goizueta Business School. That's hard to translate. So he got a PhD of statistics from University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. He studies statistics, customer relationship management, customer-based evaluations, how to use customer values to assess the COVID values. And so his research has had a huge impact on business, like even Jim Cramer read his papers and used the insights from his papers for investment. So today we're going to talk about another important paper about the impact of the pandemic, the COVID, on consumer behavior. I mean, the pandemic had a huge impact on our lifestyle. So it's important to understand how the COVID affect our consumer behavior, not only in the short run, but also in the long run. So please join me to welcome Daniel.
I hope Jim Cramer read the paper, but I think to Adrian's talk, I'm going to guess that was more of a share without read. So the general topic of my talk today is you're running your business, you have your business, you've got your customers, you're kind of chugging along, something happens. And if that something affects all of your customers, then it can be hard to say exactly what impact that event had on your business. But you may really want to know. And so this is a method to kind of deal with situations like that in general. And then I'll talk about the specific application area a little bit more. Obviously, COVID kind of affected everything and everybody. So that would be kind of an example of such an event. This is joint work with Shin Oglander. Like Claire, I have to definitely give a big shout out to him. He's the one who was the driving force behind this work. And like Ying, he's also hitting the job market this year. So if you're looking, I really can't think of anyone better than Shin. This is a link to the paper for those who do want to read the paper. I just got the QR code down at the bottom, and it's going to stay there for the rest of the presentation. So again, when you think about those events, obviously there's a lot of different events that can kind of happen, just boom, it happens and you want to know, what did it do? But one such event is COVID. And it really changed everything. It changed how we eat, it changed how we work out, consume content, travel, how we buy furniture, how we buy our clothing. And there's kind of been two extremes and then everything in the middle as to the effect that it's had. You have the people, this obviously was a bit more prevalent early on in the pandemic, but it's changing everything. And it's just changing permanently. This is the new normal is completely different from the old normal. And then you have other stories that have come out, especially more recently, where there's kind of been that post-COVID hangover. And so when you look at charts like this one, it's showing the percent of retail sales coming from e-commerce. And it kind of been powering along at a fairly, in a fairly steady way from 2000 up until, right before COVID hit in March of 2020. COVID hits, you see this very sharp spike in that market share, and then kind of right after that, it fell right back down. And again, the big question for charts like this is not, did we go back to where we were before COVID? But really the question is, did we go back to where we would have been if there was no COVID? And that could be kind of a different thing. And it gets harder to say exactly what that baseline would have been the further in time we go. So again, that's kind of the motivation behind this work is, this effect is clearly changing over time. And when you have other events like this, again, those effects could change over time. So we want to know what is the time-varying effect of that event. And we also want to know, well, in this particular case, for this use case, how does it vary by the product category? So it could be different for furniture than it is for restaurant delivery. And as Kosuke had said, I'm a customer-based corporate valuation person. And one of the big things that we really believe in is you don't just want to focus on revenue. It really helps to understand how that revenue change came about. Is it because more people were entering the category? Is it because they were more active? They stayed longer? They had a higher basket size. And so we want to decompose those effects, understand how things varied across each of those behavioral processes that drive revenue. And obviously, the substantive applications of COVID, this is something that we've all been thinking about. And a lot of money is being made or lost based on just how enduring the effect of COVID has been. Just think Zoom and all these other companies, Peloton, that have experienced very dramatic changes in demand because of COVID. So earlier version of this paper, we put it out just on restaurant delivery. It got a lot of coverage in pretty much all the major news outlets, including New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, NPR. I even testified about it to the New York Small Business Commission. So we're going to focus on restaurant delivery, but we brought in the analysis out to 12 categories. All the ones that I shared on the previous slide. Now we analyze all 12, and gotten additional press coverage through this work as well. So that's kind of the specific use case. We want to understand the effect of COVID. A lot of people really care about it. Even today, everyone's been following companies reporting like DoorDash, and you still see people talking about how, part of this is because of COVID. And so that's really important. But the broader use case is, again, you have events that happen, they kind of hit, and they affect everybody, and we want to know the effect of those things. So again, it could be Twitter just rolling out a price, rolling out their subscription to all of the people using Twitter. It could be the Apple privacy changes. We know it's been affecting. You hear companies like Wayfair talking about how they now have much less precision on their ability to target. So what effect is this having on purchase behavior? It could be some highly politicized event that may cause some people to buy, other people not to buy. Or it could be something like an acquisition. So these need not be globally spanning events like COVID or the global financial crisis. The key is that they're kind of these discrete events that kind of hit and affect everybody. So this method would apply in settings like those. And it could be a little more mundane. It could be some major packaging change. If you're a CPG company, it could be, you release a big new product within a particular product category, and you want to know, what effect did that have on overall demand within that specific product category. So again, this could be something that could apply to a lot of people in the audience today. Now, the way that we can answer this question in the COVID setting is through a data set from a company called Earnest Analytics. They have individual level data, so we literally see, individual date, spend, and merchant. And we can see that for 2.2 million people from January 2016 through, in this case, it was June of 2022. I was talking with Michael about this for probably 45 minutes yesterday. This is the Orion data set, not the Vela data set. And it's a lot of spend. It's about 3% of all the spend in America. So if you just literally just took the categories that we study and summed up all the spend across all these panel members that we observe, it's $35 billion worth of spending. It's a pretty big data set. So these are just a sample of the sort of brands that we have coverage of. So what's the approach? So again, we want to know, you've got these customers, they've been with you, the event happens, what did it do? And what we're going to do is, we're going to look at data like this one. So this is, again, the focal running example is going to be restaurant delivery, and then I'm going to show some results at the end across all 12 categories. But you have some cohort. Cohort here is being defined as when you made your first purchase in this category. So these are people who made their very first purchase in the week ending March 3rd, 2019. And so you can see, their spending had been at about, call it $5.50 per cohort member. It kind of fell a little bit, COVID hit, and then we see this very sharp increase in spending per cohort member. And again, kind of like that other chart that I showed with e-commerce market share, the big question is, well, what would we have expected had there been no COVID? And in cases like this, it's really non-trivial. And the lift estimate is very dependent on the model that you would use for how we kind of take that pre-COVID data and project it forward over the post-COVID period. So again, if we took a straight average, it could be something like this. If we kind of took that increasing spending trend in the beginning of 2020, it would kind of project up like this. You see kind of a smiley face, maybe there's going to be another smiley face that happens after that. That would lead to different estimates of the impact of COVID. And so the question is, can we do better than this? And I say the big thing that we want to emphasize in this paper is that a lot of the spending pattern is really a function of kind of two or really three main things. The first is tenure. How old is the customer? And everyone who kind of works in this empirical CRM literature, we know the effect of time, just the passage of time since you were acquired, that has a really big effect. So that's kind of one of the big things that we wanted to account for. And once you account for that, then the trends become a lot more well-behaved. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that x-axis, right now it's calendar time, and we're going to replace it with how many weeks since that cohort has been born. So for this customer, obviously the chart's the same, right? But if we then add in a cohort that was born a couple years prior, what's interesting is we can see a very similar trend in the pre-COVID period. So for the first 52 weeks of both of these cohorts' lives, we again see that smiley face, but what's interesting is that for that second cohort, over the next 52 weeks, COVID didn't hit. And we again see kind of a smiley face there. So again, there's kind of two things that are driving the differences in spending across these cohorts. One is tenure, and then the other one is cohort, when the cohort was born. And so that it seems like there's kind of an effect that some cohorts are better, some cohorts are worse, and then you kind of go along that tenure-based trajectory. And the idea is that's, again, going to explain most of the variation in the spending data. It can give us an estimate of the effect of tenure for these cohorts that were affected by COVID, and gives us a much more refined estimate of the impact of COVID. Now, it's a lot more complicated than this, but that's the general idea. So our approach is basically an extension of this, and it fits really well. There's a lot to unpack in that. This was a longer talk, but just suffice it to say, it fits real well. It's a valid model. So the big question is, what are the results? What's the impact of COVID? Now again, we want to break it down. We don't want to just understand the impact on sales. We want to see, how did that come about? And so what we're going to do is we're going to decompose it into the three behavioral processes that drive revenue. First is how many people were active. They made at least one purchase in a given week. The second is how many times did they buy during that week that they were active. The third one is how much did they spend. And then that's going to give us the bottom right quadrant, which is the spending impact. So we can see, if we kind of roll it all up, COVID hit, and then immediately sales were about 130% higher than they would have otherwise been. Roll forward the clock to June of 2022, and the effect is indistinguishable from zero. Yes, it really just went away completely. And this is before we all started to worry about recession. So, the effect of COVID basically completely went away. It was mostly driven by people who had bought in the category before coming back in. So that's kind of what drove most of the effect. What's interesting though is if you roll forward the clock to June 2022, actually fewer people are in the category than there would have otherwise been because of COVID. Maybe because, I don't know how you feel about it, but getting sick of it. You kind of were forced in, you didn't want it, you're paying all these fees, it's really expensive, oftentimes it gets delivered late. So maybe I'm fine picking up and not, or just going to the restaurant. I would want that. The other thing I would highlight is the effects of purchase frequency and a basket size, kind of rock solid flat. And you can see kind of there was this bump, and that bump really has not gone away. So again, this is kind of suggestive of maybe some more enduring effect on these two behaviors. That would have been hard to tell if we just focused on sales. So we're going to kind of take this, and we're going to look at it for 12 categories. Now the problem is, we can't look at each of these four behaviors across 12 categories. That'd be like almost 50 different charts. So I'm going to take that bottom right, just focus on sales, and look at that for the 12 categories. And if you want to see all the others, they're all in the paper, so QR code. So this is I'm going to kind of break it down, short run effect, longer run effect. Longer run just meaning, I'm going to look at it through June of 2022. So the short run effect is kind of what you would expect. All of the categories that are kind of impulsive and non-subscription and online, immediate bump of 100% plus. So restaurant delivery, grocery delivery, apparel e-commerce, furniture e-commerce, those are all majorly up. All of their offline counterparts, those are all majorly down. It seems to be air travel, movie theaters, in-store furniture, in-store apparel, gym. And then interestingly, we see there are a couple online categories that didn't quite move up as quickly. Most notably, at-home fitness. I'm going to try to use this, Claire. It's really cool how you did that. All right. There we go. And meal kits. There we go. They moved up, but they didn't move up nearly as fast. And what's interesting is those both happen to be subscriptions. And I think part of the story behind that could be you panic buy toilet paper, you don't panic subscribe to Spotify or Hulu. So these are the longer term effects. I know there's a lot here. The yellow, so basically the numbers that are in the yellow boxes are the categories where the lift is now indistinguishable from zero, statistically. So we can see in most of the categories, the lift is now indistinguishable from zero. Really, I should say the change, because you have categories that went down a lot, like in-store apparel, that are now kind of back up to where we would have expected them to be. And actually, same for movie theaters. So kind of one of the big takeaways is, in general, the effect of COVID has not generally been enduring. But we do see there are a number of categories where, where that's not the case. Well, most notably, again, look at meal kits. Still significantly up. So again, I think there's something that maybe, if you're kind of signed up for a subscription, the periodicity with which you pay, it could be you paying on autopilot, but I think there are reasons why the effects in subscription can be more enduring. And again, I think another example of that is gym, where you had that, obviously everyone kind of canceled their gym membership, or most people did, right after COVID hit. But then it kind of came back, but it never came back to zero. It's kind of stubbornly down, still about 30% below baseline, and kind of flat. Now, at-home fitness, I think it's this amalgamation of two different things. On the one hand, I think there's evidence of pre-buying, in the same way that in the furniture e-commerce category, you set up your work from home office, you bought your desk, you don't need to buy another desk the next year. And so I think a lot of people, they were kind of front-loading their demand, and now they're down 50% below baseline. I think at-home fitness, a lot of people, actually myself included, we bought a Peloton during the pandemic. Maybe we would have bought afterwards, but we bought during the pandemic because we wanted to exercise. And so I think all of that hardware demand is now kind of evaporated. But at the same time, it is a subscription, and so all those people who signed up, I think they are tending to subscribe. So I think that's kind of canceling out to zero. But yeah, just a lot of interesting insights kind of flowing from these different results. The one other thing I'll highlight, because I just have a little bit of time, if you look at restaurant delivery and sit-down restaurant, they're almost like mirror images of each other, which is kind of interesting and almost to be expected. The other interesting thing is, if you look at the kind of restaurant delivery and grocery delivery, even like the little bumps up, they almost perfectly coincide, and yet these are two entirely different categories. So there's some commonalities and some evidence of clear substitution across categories that's evident in this data. So again, there's a lot that one could unpack from those figures, but hopefully it gives you a sense of some of the insights that came about from it. So again, this is a COVID paper, but it's kind of more than a COVID paper. I think there could be a lot of other use cases for a model like this in settings where you have those discrete events that happen. Obviously, the effects of COVID, they've been varying across these categories. We see very clear differences between the short run and the longer run effects. So I want to leave some time for questions. I think I'll end it here. Thanks so much, and looking forward to it.